There's Gareth Icke. He's the living proof that good voices are not genetic. Because you don't get it from me. I've been known to clear a room with karaoke. Okay. We're going to go to some strange places now. This is Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti. If we can really understand the problem, the answer will come out of it, because the answer is not separate from the problem. What you kind of get is people, what you might call the New Age arena, I've had over the years, who say, you shouldn't speak about that, it's negative. Well, I don't think knowledge is negative, ignorance is negative, because when you're in ignorance of what the problem is, then you can't do anything about it. So I think knowing what's going on is quite important. But in this section, we are going to go into some strange places, to say the least. Just to reiterate the problem, we've got disconnected from the full magnitude of who we are, isolated in the five senses, thanks to the bamboozle that's been set up to hold us in perceptual servitude and created the madhouse. And now the question is, who's behind it, or what's behind it? And this is where we go into some strange places. This is a lovely quote. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. That's the program. And it's a big mistake if we're going to understand what's going on in the world, especially when we come to this bit, which is, how do we get there to this Hunger Games society? Total human control. We hide the real controllers, which is what has been happening through known human history. Who is the spider? What is this force and source that's driving all this? Well, it ain't them. Here today, gone tomorrow, politicians, different parties, same party, it doesn't matter. It's not them. No one who ever does this job, even as the so-called President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, yeah, okay. Yep, I'll believe you. Nor is it even the corporations. And a lot of people say it's the corporations. It's not. The corporations are not the origin of this control and this centralization of power. They are a vehicle for it, not the spider. And it's no one who's sitting around a table apparently making the decisions in the public eye. Those you see are only gophers for those you don't see. You can go deeper into the rabbit hole, away from the people you see, into the advisors. It's not them either. You can go even deeper into the rabbit hole, and you can find the Rothschilds and people like that. We are the Rothschilds. You don't see us, but we control your life. Well, yes, but only on one level. They're not the origin either. So who is the spider? What is the driving force? Mark Twain said, truth is stranger than fiction because fiction is obliged to stick to perceived possibilities. Truth isn't. The truth doesn't change because you don't want to hear it. And the postage stamp consensus is currently in an ambulance heading for emergency because it's heard what I'm going to say next. And this is as far off that postage stamp that you could possibly imagine. So it's in intensive care until I've finished. So are we ready? Are we ready? Who is the spider? This takes us into this next level of the rabbit hole, which is a level of non-human intelligence, which is ultimately, well, I say ultimately, there might be levels beyond that. Ultimately, as we see it now, behind what's going on in the world. All these different areas of human society of control, secret societies, politics, banking, Satanism, pedophilia, military, media, religion, it all in the end ends up leading to one place, which is this spider, this force, which is not human. Okay, yes, I can understand that to an extent. I have a question. But hold on a minute. We live in an electromagnetic spectrum that's 0.005% of what exists in the universe, so mainstream science says, and we can only see a tiny fraction, visible light, of that electromagnetic spectrum of 0.005%. if you take the projected size of the universe according to mainstream science, then the Earth, by comparison, is 1/1000th of a pinhead. I feel it in me water. I think there's other life out there other than us. Honestly, I do. I'm convinced. This is, again, it's like, take a deep breath, look at it again. It's freaking obvious. It's like, do you think the sun affects our temperature? Oh, yeah, okay. Our consciousness, this is Bernard Carr, professor of mathematics and astronomy at Queen Mary University, London. Our consciousness interacts with another dimension. Our physical senses only show us a three-dimensional universe. What exists in the higher dimensions are entities we cannot touch with our physical senses. They're on different frequencies. And these non-human manipulators, visitors, from other dimensions of reality have been described in many and various ways by different cultures all over the world. The serpent gods, Chitauri and the Zulu belief system, the children of the serpent, the Anunnaki, Sumer, Babylon, Snake Brothers, Hopi, Star People, many and various. They're called demons in Christianity, interdimensional entities. The Gnostic people I'll come to in a second called them archons, and the Islamic, or actually the pre-Islamic world where it originated from, called them jinn. And these are entities either that are manifesting within our reality, our visible light frequency band, or manipulating from outside of that visual frequency of perception. And the different ways, I say different ways, the common ways that they are described, many of them, very, very compelling in different cultures and belief systems. They are clearly describing the same force. Like the archons in the Gnostic belief system, as they call them, they said of the archons, they were made from luminous fire. And they kind of create with luminous fire. And the jinn are said by the Islamic world to be made from smokeless fire. And the way that they are described, they're clearly describing the same entities, the same force. Now, the Gnostics, I've got very interested in them in the last few years. The Gnostics were not a race, or even a people. They were a belief system. They were a perception system. And whenever they got into a place and started to communicate this perception, this knowledge, it's what gnosis means, knowledge, but a certain kind of knowledge, they were persecuted by the Roman Church who sent the boys in. So it was the Gnostic perception system that was running the Great or Royal Library at Alexandria in Egypt. This fantastic depository of ancient knowledge and ancient historical awareness knowledge, which was destroyed in pieces, in sections, in a sequence over a period by the Roman Church. And the most significant one, the most talked about one, happened around 400 AD, just after. And the Gnostics, when you see what they were saying, you can see why the Roman Church wanted to destroy them. And the Cathars in southern France were also, in the same way, Gnostic thinkers. They had a perception of the universe that was what the Gnostic belief system. And the Roman Church sent the boys in, again in stages, and eventually destroyed them in the public arena at the siege of the castle of Montségur in 1244. Now, it seemed that what the Gnostics believed had been lost, the detail of it anyway. But then, in 1945, a sealed jar was found, an earthen jar, at a place called Nag Hammadi, about 70, 80 miles north of Luxor on the Nile in Egypt. And in that jar was found to be a pack of writings, codices, manuscripts that were put there by the Gnostics. It's estimated around 400 AD, which kind of would sync with the destruction of the Great Library at Alexandria, which was around 415, I think, as I recall, AD. And so suddenly, there were writings which described what the Gnostics believed in detail, and they had the great benefit of, because they were in an earthen jar all that time, they couldn't, like other religious writings, be played with and changed to fit the authority of the day. And 1/5 of these writings found at Nag Hammadi talk about something they call the archons. Just their name, it's a word, means rulers. That's why they call them that. And they said that they were manipulating human society from the unseen and were responsible for basically creating the world of what we call physicality. Now, what I found fascinating from my point of view about the Nag Hammadi writings is that I came to them quite late, just a few years ago, which was very important for me, because if I'd have come across them earlier, they can become a one-stop shop belief system, which they have for some people. But by the time I came across them and read them in detail, I'd come to conclusions as a result of decades of research. So when I'm reading them, I'm thinking, well, this is unbelievable to me, because this is what they're saying is what I've concluded. It was a confirmation, a very detailed confirmation of what I concluded was going on. And in these Nag Hammadi writings, they describe something called the silence, what I would call, and Ibn Alexander would call the dazzling darkness. The silence, what I experienced, the place of all potential, all possibility, the field of possibility and probability waiting to manifest, the silence. And I experienced it as the silence, so I can understand where that word came from. And the other thing about these ancient writings, and writings like them in religion and in ancient cultures, is they only had, as I said earlier, the symbols and analogies that fitted the society of the time. They didn't have computers. They didn't have Wi-Fi fields. And so what we're looking at are descriptions using the symbols of the time. We can now update them. But what the Gnostics also called the silence was the father of all. They were trying to get across in a simple way the creator of all. Not a man with a beard on a throne, the creative force of all, the father of all. And this is from one of the Nag Hammadi texts, talking about this silence. He is an incomprehensible one, but it is he who comprehends all, and nothing exists outside of him. But all exists within him, and he is boundary to them all, as he encloses them all, and they are all within him. There is no place outside of him. Describing all that is, has been, and ever can be, the force that drives all things. But they said, and this is so the really massively relevant part to the world that we live in, they said that the silence was the creative force, but there was a fake God which had created this reality that they call the physical world. They said the physical world is a prison created by an evil fake God. Spirit, awareness, as I would call it, is entrapped in the body. Salvation, escape from this entrapment, comes from knowledge or gnosis of self and reality. And gnosis is knowledge, yes, but it's not knowledge, names, dates, places knowledge. It's knowledge of reality and how it works, that kind of knowledge. And they said the kingdom is invisible, which is true, because that which is beyond this reality is invisible to us. Everything else that exists. Now, this physical world prison that they describe in their language, I call the simulation. We update it into modern language. They said that this force was this evil fake God had created and was responsible for the world we live in at a physical level and for entrapping people in the physical world. And they had various names for this fake God. One of them was the Demiurge. Another one was Yaldabaoth. It's also called Samael. This is the origin of Satan, the devil. And they said in these writings that the Old Testament God, Yahweh, Jehovah, was the Old Testament name for this fake god, which also was called in the writings Lord Archon. Again, where we get this whole theme of the Lord from in the Old Testament. Now you can see the correlation between the Nag Hammadi writings and their belief system, which hadn't been touched while it was in that sealed jar, and what you see in the Bible. Well, one of the Nag Hammadi writings says, talking about this fake god, I'll call it demiurge, opening his eyes, the chief archon saw a vast quantity of matter without limit, and he became arrogant, saying, "It is I who am God, and there is no other power apart from me." And then if you go to Isaiah in the Old Testament, "I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me." The correlations are quite blatant between the two. So Nag Hammadi Gnostic writings described this demiurge, this prime force of manipulation, as the blind one, blind to the spiritual world, disconnected from the greater picture, but understanding certain levels of reality in a way that it could manipulate and control. Now, this fake god, this demiurge, they describe the archons as the formless ones. We're not talking about something in form. We're talking about a state of awareness, a very highly distorted state of awareness, an imbalanced, inverted state of awareness or inverted frequency from which it seeks to pull everything into that same distortion. Now, a perception can be a panorama, so you see this vast panorama, or you can be in a pitch black room. It's still a perception, but it's a completely different perception. And this distorted perceptual state that they call the demiurge or the archons is a state of awareness that is without harmony, without wisdom, without heart, without empathy. All the things that the people running this world don't have, and there's a reason for that we'll come to. Now, one of the things we need to get away from is the fact that life, consciousness, awareness has to have 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, and a head. That's just one form of vehicle for awareness. You can have pure awareness, you can have expanded awareness, you can have heart-centered awareness, or you can have what we call evil awareness, which is a vast distortion of harmony. So some scientists now are looking at this whole idea of what pertains to be life in a different way. This is a mainstream headline: "Is alien life everywhere? Radical theory claims it may have become part of the fabric of the universe." He was talking about maybe our laws of physics are actually this kind of alien consciousness. So we're starting to get away from this idea of the human form is the only way that intelligent life can operate. It can't. And I watched the whole series of this called Through the Wormhole, fronted up by Morgan Freeman, on the Science Channel, where they were looking at, it was mainstream scientists, but to be fair, they were looking and asking questions about the big picture, the big questions. And they were looking with more sympathy on the fact that maybe the postage stamp doesn't know it all. And they asked the question in one edition, one program: are digital aliens hiding within technological systems? Because the digital level is also a state of awareness. And it's a state of awareness that can manifest and can make things happen and can take control if it's in the right arena. And this is a guy called Christoph Adami from Michigan State University. He said in that program, we can define life in terms of informational processes. So life and awareness and what we call forms of consciousness take many and various expressions, infinite expressions. And thus, we're not talking ultimately about somebody in a form, although they do take form. We're talking about a distorted awareness that's behind all this. So the archons in their base form are a chaotic, imbalanced, inverted state of awareness, thus frequency. And the Gnostic writings talk about how the fake god, the demiurge, made copies of itself. So the archon demiurge became the Lord Archon of the archons, which were basically like the way I see it anyway, it's like Agent Smith in The Matrix. It's a program, it's a software program, and there was one of them. And then it made loads and loads of copies of itself, and there were endless then Agent Smiths, all acting the same and looking the same. This is the theme that I'm talking about in terms of the archons. They were copies of the original distortion. So I'm using the word archons here in this section as a name for the many and various expressions of a deeply distorted and inverted awareness, because it does take many expressions, some of which I'll come to. So the Nag Hammadi writings said of the archons and the demiurge, Lord Archon. Archon, as I said, means prince, ruler, authorities, and from the beginning. They say that they've been here from the beginning of this world because they basically were responsible for it. They say that the demiurge is a fake god that created our physical or material reality as we perceive it. Gnostics related the demiurge to the Judeo-Christian Yahweh Jehovah God, and they said that the archons were inorganic. They did not result and come in what we would call a natural way, inorganic, not resulting or produced by growth, artificial. When in our language, they're saying that this is a form of artificial intelligence. By the end of this section, that will become very, very relevant. They describe the archons as the guardians and the gatekeepers. The guardians are the gatekeepers of humanity going into a state of expanded awareness, holding them in that lower state of awareness, because then they could control them. In expanded states of awareness, they cannot control, and thus they want to stop us from going there. The writings say that the archons sought to overpower humanity in its psychological and perceptual functions. That's exactly what I've been talking about all day, how the manipulation of perception is how the control system works. They said the archon agenda for humanity is creating fear and slavery. Well, that's again what I've been talking about all day. That's what's happened since this hijack took place. And if you look in the Bible, you'll see kind of indications of what I'm talking about here. Here's one. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities. Both names that actually mean archon in that language. Against the powers of this dark world and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly, unseen realms. They said in the writings that the demiurge and the archons have no creative imagination and envy humans because we do. They describe them in our language like cyborgs, a robotic race that can imitate but not innovate. They called it counter-mimicry. In simple terms, if you gave this archontic awareness a blank sheet of paper, it wouldn't know what to do with it. It couldn't create on it. But you give it something on the paper and it can twist it and manipulate it to suit its agenda. They described how the archontic awareness was expert in fantasia, creating illusions that the target population think are real. They describe them as mind parasites that possessed human perceptual processes, that they were experts in deception. They were called the deceivers, and also in inversion. And this is the key. They describe them in our language as a form of artificial intelligence, a robotic race artificial. That's big time important, like I say later on. Now, the other thing they describe in the Nag Hammadi writings is something called Hal, which in the Coptic Egyptian language they were written in is what we would call simulation, creating illusions, virtual reality that people believe to be real, and how they were experts in it. Now, the Gnostic said of the archons, they make something appear to happen that does not happen. They can induce a virtual reality experience, using our language, of course. And the Islamic and pre-Islamic world said of the jinn, they can manipulate humans by creating illusions. We're looking at the same theme here and the same force. So, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. This manipulative force is very, very limited in what it can do and what it can create. So it has to keep the target population it is actually trying to absorb, I'll get into that at the end of this section, in a lower state of awareness than it's in. And this is a classic description of the situation we're in. In the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. This force is symbolically the one-eyed man, and it's made humans blind so the one-eyed man can control. Once we become the two-eyed, three-eyed, third-eyed human, again, expanded awareness beyond that, it's over. But not until, and that means breaking the program and letting go of all these belief systems that hold us in servitude. The archontic writings of the Gnostics also say that the archons made a bad copy of the original reality. And they say the bad copy is where we are now, this world. Again, he's back. Bad copy, what you freaking talking about? Well, what am I talking about? With a bad copy of original reality? I'm back to the simulation. What the NASA scientist described when he said the universe is a digital hologram and may have been designed by a non-human force. Well, it had to be designed by a non-human force if it wasn't designed by humans. And so we're looking at this simulation, a bad copy. What is a computer game, a video game, a virtual reality game? It is a bad copy of this reality, in effect. We're talking about the same principle. What they say in these writings is that the real world, prime reality, is described in terms of being the upper eons. This is the place of spirit. This is a place of pure awareness. And they say we live in what they call in the writings the lower eons. They call it a shadow world, which is, they say, a reflection of the prime reality, a copy, a bad copy, in other words, of that original reality, which of course still exists. And we can interact with it when we open our five sense minds to consciousness. So what we're looking at, we're talking about bad copies and we're talking about, different worlds. We're talking about information sources. That's what we're talking about. Because just as in this world, we think it's a world, but we are decoding an information source into the world that I've described that we think is outside of us, but inside of us, what happened with this bad copy is one information source was replaced by another, the simulation, and humans started to decode and experience the simulation as if it was real, because they were decoding it in the same way through the same senses. You can decode one information source and then decode another, and your experience is dramatically different, but they both seem real. Nag Hammadi Tech's Origin of the World says, now the eternal realm, the eternal eon, the upper eon of truth has no shadow outside it, for the limitless light is everywhere within it. But its exterior is shadow, which has been called by the name darkness. From it there appeared a force presiding over the darkness, and the forces that came into being subsequent to them called the shadow the limitless chaos. The word chaos is used again and again to describe the actions of this archontic force, which is a chaotic, distorted state of awareness. Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, in other words, these writings say, created the lower eons as an image or reflection of the upper eons. This is the simulation, I'm calling it. In relation to the reflection which he saw in it, he created the world. With a reflection of a reflection, he worked at producing the world. So what they're describing is pure awareness in a higher frequency realm of what they call upper eons, the realm of spirit, and this reality being a realm of form or matter. And they say, interestingly, that the upper eons are the realm of no time, and the fake reality is the realm of time, illusory time. So I'm saying they're describing the simulation, the fake reality. And, it's interesting, when you look at the Matrix, the person that created the Matrix in the movie was known as the architect. Well, the Freemasonic God is known as the great architect of the universe. And the Gnostics called the demiurge the great architect of the universe. They're describing the force that created this reality. Not what we call God or infinite awareness, the creative force, but this distortion created this distorted reality. Now, where is the matrix? It's in our heads. It's in our perceptual decoding system. And therefore, if we are locked in only to the frequency of the matrix has completely got control of our perception of reality. When you expand your awareness, you still experience the matrix on one level, but you can see and perceive beyond it, and thus you start to see where you are. You're starting to see the maze now. They don't want us there. This is why they're terrified of this information.